Every year on the first Sunday of the year, I like to do a sermon where we go through and talk about what God has done amongst us in the year before. And we do this because it's a biblical concept. And I'm going to read a story in Joshua chapter 4 in just one moment. And I want to remind us what God calls us to do to remember, because sometimes what we do naturally is sort of project. We're always looking towards the future. And sometimes that doesn't allow us to really just stop and say, wow, God has been good to us in the past as well. And sometimes the best way to understand the future is to look back at the past. What are the ways in which God has behaved and acted and helped? And this helps us shape to see how God might help us moving forward in the future as well. And so every year I like to go back and look at what God has done through the last year to remind us all that God has done amongst us. And just this morning I was talking to Dan, who's our sound guy, and he said, hey, didn't you do this sermon last year? And I said, Dan, I do it every year. But the one reason that I think it might be memorable last year is because I remember the feedback from it was, oh my goodness, God did do a lot this year. Because coming off of 2020, it felt as though it had been such a stagnant year where not much had happened. It was a difficult year. And so remembering what God had done even in the midst of the struggle was helpful. But even now, I mean, we had so many call-off days in children's ministry and worship ministry and all this kind of stuff. With the Omicron is running through our society and all that sort of stuff, which is less than a joy. It kind of feels like in some ways we're on 2020, like the third part of the trilogy. And I'm ready for a new movie, if I'm honest. But that's okay. Hopefully by the end of today, you'll be encouraged to see that God has been working even amongst some of the difficulties. And so the story I want to remind you of how God shaped his people to remember what God had done is from Joshua chapter 4. The story basically goes like this. God had called the people out of slavery, the Israelites. He had opened up the Red Sea and led them towards what he said was going to be a promised land. Moses was the one who led them through this, who was God's voice to the people, telling them what God was leading them to do. But they ended up wandering for 40 years, mostly on their own fault and their own argument and fighting with God. But God was faithful to continue with them. And it got to the point that they were up against the promised land, that they were going to go into the place that God had promised them all along. And by this point, Moses was no longer alive. The leadership had been handed off to Joshua, and I'm sure the people were wondering, can this guy do the stuff that Moses did? Can he lead us into the promised land? Are we going to come up against mighty armies and foes beyond our capability? Will God still help us? And so there was this little hint that God was still going to help them, because on their way in to take the land that God had given them, the Jordan dried up and parted to let them walk through as well. It was a safe passage across water, and as a bit of a reminder of the Red Sea in the past. And when the people got over to the other side, the Ark of the Covenant was still in the middle of the water, and Joshua decided to memorialize what God had done that day, leading them into the promised land. This is the story I want to read you from Joshua chapter 4 as a reminder that God calls us sometimes to remember what has happened in the past, to remind each other that God has been faithful, and to celebrate all that God has done. The story is in Joshua chapter 4, verses 1 to 9. I invite you to stand with me as we read the word of the Lord today. Starting with verse 1. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua. And they carried them over to their camp, where they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at a spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood. And they are there to this day. Now the priests who carried the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people, just as Moses had directed Joshua. The people hurried over. Oh, I'm reading too far, aren't I? Oh, it's so good, though. Sorry. It's a good story, yeah. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. And so that is the story, that 12 people, one from each tribe, went into the water and brought out a stone and created a memorial. And the instructions were given to them that every time your children see these stones, remind them of how good God had been to us, what God had done. So every year, just for a few weeks, I erect this pile of stones as a reminder that God has been good to us. And so I want to go through 12 different things, and in some ways it's more than 12 things, that God has done and helped us with in this last year that has made Crossroads really do incredible things for the sake of ministry and for the kingdom. And so let's start with the first stone. The very first stone is that we restarted VBS. And in 2020, we didn't have VBS because of COVID. And in 2021, we didn't think we could go all out. So we didn't advertise it like we usually did. We didn't partner with other churches that we partnered with before. We aimed for about half of what we usually have. And normally we have 350 to 400 children. And so this year we were aiming for more than 150 to 200 range. And we ended up having 182 kids and 98 volunteers involved in VBS this year, which was it was a really great week of VBS. And just so you can get a feel for how many people and children that is, I have a time-lapse video of them all leaving here, heading off to their classes for you to watch. So there you go. That was 182 plus 98 or whatever. I guess some of them were already in their room, helpers and all. But what an incredible ministry that was to restart VBS the year, to see kids give their lives to Jesus, to see people at church come together for such a big, big operation and serve with one another. It was an incredible, incredible thing to see God work among our children in VBS this year. Number two was the amount of money and work we did for local benevolence. Last year at our Christmas Eve service, we took an offering that we said was going to go to local benevolence. It was so overwhelmingly strong that it essentially funded that ministry for the entire year this year. So every bit of money that we've taken in this year, we've stocked aside, and it's going to fund next year. And we're now a year in advance on local benevolence. So we're not trying to keep up all the time and manage a fund. And so before December started, I went and looked back. We hadn't closed December by the time I wrote this sermon. We had to close out the whole year. But I looked at our last financial statement through the end of November. By the end of November, we had given away to help people in need $30,197 to help people in need. And that's before our biggest month of the year, December, where we help people with Christmas and food and having a family holiday and helping people who have children as well. So likely we spent $35,000+ giving it away to help people. And that includes, we helped a widow who was in critical debt after her husband died, and all of those costs were piling up and on credit cards. We helped people pay crushing bills. We helped people get on their feet and get started after life changes or moves. We helped people pay for their heat or their utility bills. We helped people cover things for their kids and pay for stuff for families this year. All sorts of people in all sorts of varying levels of need. We helped meet those needs for people because of the generosity of people in this church. And we've already got that budgeted amount set for next year, so that as money comes in this year, we're already then prepping for 2023 so that we can stay out in front and make sure that when people are in serious need, we can say yes. And as a church, this is a ministry that we have both inside of our community and then outside of our community as well. Stone number 3 is that we called 2 new pastors to be a part of our congregation. I'm very excited about both of them. The first is Pastor Gretchen. I'm hoping many of you have met her. She's currently in the nursery watching babies. So, you know, she's already ankle deep in the work of ministry here at the church, if you will. She's been an incredible gift to us already, and it's been great to have her and her enthusiasm and her vision and her imagination as a part of the team. If you haven't met her yet, she's a very interesting and fun person, but one of the things that really amazes me is that her month here is the first month of her life that she's not lived in Michigan. She's 30 years old. She lived her whole life in Michigan. All of her family lives within about 20 minutes of each other. And after Christmas this week, she went back and surprised them and saw them. And some of them had cried because they'd never gone this long without seeing her. And to see her again was that emotional. And so when I was talking to her about possibly taking this role, I was truly amazed by how seriously she was taking this call in terms of prayer, to really think, is this what God wants me? And I was nervous throughout it all. I was like, Maryland is a pretty big change from Michigan, and living in one place your whole life is a big deal. And she was seriously bringing it before God, making sure that it was God who was calling her to this and not just her trying something new or whatever at 30 years old. And so I was really impressed by the way in which she took this issue to prayer. And I've already been impressed as well, seeing her work with our children and work with volunteers. And she's really digging into the community. People seem to be really loving working with her. She has a degree in pastoral ministry, and she is ordained as a pastor. But also what's really interesting is that she has an associate's degree in child development. So she has a real sense of that sort of technical component as well, helping children grow and what matters and what's appropriate age by age to help them out as well. And so she's bringing all sorts of gifts and abilities to us that have just been a huge, huge blessing to the church. The second pastor we called is Pastor Jen Willard, who is here and in this room today. She was with the teens in the first service, and even though today is technically 2022, we did hire her and make the agreement in 2021, so I think this is okay to talk about. So I hope that works for you all. I was saying in the first service that when I was going through the whole process of doing a nationwide search for a possible youth pastor, Pastor Shane Valenstein, who was once upon a time the youth pastor here for a long time, now pastors a church that we planted in this area as well, in his offices in the building. I see him regularly. He would ask me often how the youth pastor search was going. And of course, Shane has a vested interest because he spent 5, 6, 7 years as a youth pastor here and wants to see the ministry continue and be strong. And so when I started zeroing in on Pastor Jen and telling him about her experience and what she'd done and her resume and all this kind of stuff, Shane said to me, "Oh man, she sounds like the best youth pastor this place has ever hired." And I giggled and laughed because I knew he was making a self-deprecating comment. But it is really true. We had a stack about this thick of resumes about 2-3 months ago that I brought to all of our youth leaders. There was about 8 to 10 in there, and I asked them all to just go through there and to tell me which ones they thought I should prioritize to make sure this wasn't just me making a decision. And so without fail, she was number one for everyone except 1 or 2 who they had named her number 2. She stood out as someone with incredible skills. And let me tell you about some of these things that were on this resume that wowed our people so much. Jen, you're 30, right? Not yet? Almost? Almost 30, right? I hope I'm embarrassing you, by the way. It's good initiation. So by not yet 30, she has already been a trustee on a board of a university. She works with Fuller Seminary, developing youth ministry plans in the context we live in today. She writes curriculum with Orange. She writes and maintains a blog to train youth workers in the denomination. She's been published with Youth Specialties. She was the vice president of the South Central Field of NYI being Nazarene Youth International, and the South Central Field being the area of Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana, right? Vice president of the field. She's been the district president in 2 different states in the Church of the Nazarene. She's coordinated multiple camps and many more things, all before she turned 30. And so you can see why our leaders looked at her resume and said, wow, this is an incredible leader, someone who could really help us move into the next era of ministry. And so while she's just getting started today and this week, we're really looking forward to what it is that God might do through her for Crossroads. I invite you to be praying for these new pastors. There's a lot of life change. Like, they've got to figure out where Starbucks is. I mean, like granular. They got to figure out who their leaders are. They got to remember names, right? There's a lot of things about changing and getting started. So please remember them in prayer. But for everything else, we are so excited that God has brought these two here. We really look forward to seeing what their leadership and call will bring to make Crossroads an even better place. Number 4 is we started something called Worship and Prayer Nights this year. And this was birthed out of a desire for us to help people who couldn't come back to church. We have people in our congregation who have cancer, who have other illnesses, whose doctors are saying, no, you cannot go back to indoor worship. And so we wanted to do something roughly quarterly where we could meet in ways that allowed people who had critical health issues that were keeping them from coming and gathering with the church to be able to worship with us. And so we started this outdoors in the summer, and we did them about quarterly. This was really designed by Pastor Nan, by Heather, one of our administrators here, and by Pastor Austin. And they invited people who aren't necessarily on the stage all that often to help participate and bring leadership to these things and have just intentional times of worship and prayer with one another. And we did 2, one in each of the last 2 quarters of the year, and I hope that we're going to continue this into the next year. But it's another opportunity to come as the people of God together, to gather together and to pray and to worship with one another and to make that central in our lives. And these pictures are from the one we did this summer. Well, it was still, oh man, I see the sun shining on one of the vehicles back there. I missed that, but it's coming again soon, and we will gather outside once more when it possibly comes. Number 5 is we restarted the Christmas Coffee House this year. There were lots of great acts, way better than ours, but this was my favorite picture of the night.
Yeah. Love you.
Yeah, well, that's what I look like most of the week, Herb. So that's a pretty common expression. For me, it's Nan. Nan is the one that I love. So, it was so great to get together and to have a night that was just calm and casual, being with each other, seeing the gifts and talents that we didn't necessarily know that people in our church had, watching them flourish on instruments and singing. It was just a really, really great night to celebrate the Christmas season and celebrate being with one another. It's one of those things that when you go a year having to cancel so many things, when things come back, they bring you a certain amount of comfort. And that was one of those things that brought me a lot of comfort. And I heard the same from so many people. It was great to have that back again. Number 6 is that we opened our building to the community. And building space was difficult to come by because of COVID restrictions and rules and all that kind of stuff. So as often as we could, we tried to partner with community organizations to utilize the building we had to help them restart and to do things. We did so under as much safety protocol as we possibly could. We shared all this kind of stuff, and we helped different community organizations thrive in this last year. Just as a list of things that we partnered with included an Indian dance team, Elevate Basketball, HCYP Softball, Catonsville Baseball, the Red Cross, which is what the picture is here of, people donating blood. And they've been in such critical need of blood donations that they've asked to use this gym multiple times as often as possible for us to help keep them at a safe level so that they can help people who are in critical need in our community. We've also partnered with the Boy Scouts, with Be More Caring. This year, through Be More Caring, just in the last year alone, in the kitchen here, through the help of Mason and Randy Clay, we prepared 15,840 meals to give to people in need who are hungry. And then we also partnered with Encore Music Academy as well. That's just a flavor of the organizations who use this building outside of our church community as a way for us to build partnerships and trust in our organization, or in our community. Number 7 is building improvements that we did over this year. And there are 2 different ways that we improved the building. Some was aesthetic and some was technical. This picture up here right now is an example of the aesthetic improvements we did. And I should have mentioned the first service, but I will now. This picture is actually shortly after we redid the gathering place, where Pastor Austin met with teens to help work with them, to help hand music ministry to them so that they become leaders in the youth ministry. I'll talk about that more in a minute later. But that was just an informational training meeting when Austin was working with our teenagers and helping them think about how to become leaders in their own group. It was really exciting. But you can see there that we put the couch up there. We did some aesthetic improvements up there. We've done them in a lot of places in the building. This whole section this way upstairs, we have repainted, trying to get rid of dings and cracks in the wall, things that happen across 15 years of a building being operational. We finished up the gathering place, an office, all sorts of things we've done to just try to put a little bit of paint on the building to make sure that it looks new and modern, and that the wear and tear that buildings take sort of becomes minimized, because we're staying in front of this, not wanting the building to become in disrepair to the point that it's a money pit, right? So we've had the opportunity to stay out in front of that. But that's not just an aesthetic thing. It's something that we have to do as well in terms of just the infrastructure of the building as well. This picture is one that I clearly took right about there of Dave Watchhorn and that cherry picker all the way up there. And I appreciate all that Dave Watchhorn does, but this is definitely one of those things, because it's not really easy to find people who are willing to suspend themselves 50 feet in the air with just a little tie on your back in case something goes wrong. But Dave, of course, is willing to do that. He takes time off of work during a week when we rent that cherry picker, and he went through here checking every piece of light that we have up there, making sure that it was all in working repair. That's just one of the many things that we've done in terms of trying to keep the infrastructure of the church going. We've added an entirely new lighting system in here, which includes backsplashes here that kind of looks like a stained glass window in design. We also added things that you may not be able to see, but help bring quality to the church underneath in ways that you might not notice without being told. For example, we got in-ear monitors for all of our singers, so that they're not up here singing to you, trying to also listen to whatever floor monitor they are, but they can hear clearly now so that they can sing very well. We also added click tracks underneath to all the songs we do, which basically, if you don't know music all that well, you might get a song that's written in 6/8, and that's insane. That's very hard. And so what this does is it plays just a click for the people who have to play instruments to hear the time regularly throughout the entire song. So they're not the one trying to guess, am I still on time? But they're hearing it click for them. All of this to make sure that we're building a beautiful worship experience that then is also helpful to the people who are just simply volunteers on our musical team as well. Help them up their game and feel as though that they're supported. We've also done things like switching fixtures in the ceiling and putting in energy-efficient LEDs. We've improved different deferred maintenance things. Like, for example, the last week or so, I learned that when we turn the boiler on in our church, it turns all of the water to 180 degrees, and it keeps it there throughout the entire winter. And so even, Maryland, right, there are days where it's like 67 degrees in January for no reason at all. The water is still pumping at 180 degrees through our building. And so we worked with our HVAC person to put in a machine that then when it senses the temperature is going up above 50 outside, it cools the water temperature so that we don't have to pay so much money and just utilities out the door, which then allows us to refocus that money towards ministry and mission instead. We repainted the lines in the parking lot. We added cameras around the building to increase security and safety for everyone who is involved here as well. Little things like that are hard to see, but things that we've done this year in order to keep making Crossroads a safe and thriving and then also a place that stewards its money well also. Number 8, we had NMI outreach. NMI stands for Nazarene Missions International, and this involves both of the way we think about missions internationally and then also the way we try to shape ourselves to be missional locally as well. And so I wanted to highlight just some of the things that we did locally this year, although there are things that we're involved in globally as well. This picture is from our food truck day, which our NMI organized and led. Every time I see this picture, I immediately notice that big pink Taharka truck back there. I think I'm pronouncing it right, but that's the ice cream truck. But we had people from our community that have nothing to do with Crossroads on our facilities, on our grounds that day, getting to know us, helping us build trust with them, letting them know we're here for them, that we want to be a good neighbor, a good part of the community. Other things that NMI pioneered this year and helped lead was working with First Fruits Farm, which is a group that has a piece of land in northern Maryland, Baltimore County, that harvests food to give away to the poor. So they have volunteers who come in. We have sent volunteers. In fact, a couple on the way out today said they've continued all year long, and they moved into central volunteering there because of their connection with Crossroads in the first place, in helping raise crops in order to give food that's healthy away to people who are poor that have struggled to afford the prices of fruits and vegetables in the store. Completely Christian-run ministry that helps poor people. It's just an incredible partnership we had. We went to a Baltimore City school and helped clean up their grounds because they don't have enough money in order to hire a staff or an outside company to come in and keep their grounds cleaned. So we sent a group of people here to help those schools prepare for the school year and get their grounds cleaned up beforehand. We also partnered with an AME church in Catonsville, Baltimore line, in which we helped put Thanksgiving meals on people's tables who couldn't afford it otherwise. These are all just partnerships with what God is already doing in the community that we wanted to be a part of, that we sent our manpower, our people, to then serve as well to help build a Christian presence in the gospel in our community. Number 9, I wanted to share a few ministry moments and stats with you as well, because it's not just about what we do, right, but then how God helps change people's lives as well. This year we baptized 5 people, which is really impressive because people weren't real excited about jumping in water during COVID, right? So 5 people, finally, after the summer was over, we thought it's safe enough for us to do baptisms again, and we did 5 baptisms since September. We added 17 new members. I counted 65 people who led a small group in some way this year, 65 different people, whether that's teen small group leading or in-home small group leading or leading a group here, a midterm, a short term, all sorts of things, 65 people who were involved in that. We started Crossroads Moms this year, which we used to do MOPS and Moms Next, and we combined them and made it local. And they meet twice a month on Monday nights together, and Ann Carlson has led that whole charge of getting that together and starting that. We had a marriage conference this year, which Nan and Dan Jeffries put together and hosted. We had a women's conference, which Jen Rowland leads women's ministry and brought together a whole council. And let me tell you, that was an experience because about a week before the women's conference, our speaker that we had planned for 6 to 12 months had a death in her family and couldn't make it. And suddenly we were trying to re-scramble and rethink that whole thing with just a few days' notice. And Jen and her team pulled that off. And we got feedback from that conference that it went really well, that it was meaningful, and that people loved being together and felt fed by that conference. So that was really exciting and great to see Jen's incredible leadership. We started Crossroads 55 Plus this year, and Nan Jeffries has led that from a pastoral point of view. It used to be called Prime Timers, but Nan wanted to make it sound cooler. So 55 Plus. You see? Yeah, all right. So now you know, if you're in the neighborhood of 55 years old, now it's cool, and you should join. All right. I hope you heard that very loud and clear. We also, in our building this year, did 1 wedding and 4 funerals. And if you want to hear about that wild experience, you should ask Jake about the wedding, because Jake led that wedding just before Christmas, and it was quite a story. But I'm not going to tell it. It's Jake's story to tell you, so you should ask him about it. But there are lots of great ministry outcomes this year. One of my favorite ministry outcomes that was a vision and a goal that we had is our 10th stone. And that was, in a time of interim, oftentimes you're just trying to maintain and try not to lose momentum and all this kind of stuff. But the one goal that we really set that was forward thinking with our teens is that we wanted to transition from adults leading the music to handing it off to the teenagers, that they would find another avenue that they could take ownership of their youth group and be leaders. You saw a picture earlier of Austin working with them. Austin worked with them through all of this. And we got to the point that by the end of the year, the last 2 or 3 months, it was almost entirely teen-led, with maybe an adult here or there filling in an instrument to help them out. The teens who had talents, who are working on music at school or in private lessons, started owning the leadership of leading their peers into worship. And it was an incredible experience to see them really take hold of this and really develop. And so I brought a video that I took of them doing a song, and it's music. It's very clearly music, which is great. And I'm going to warn you before we watch the video that it's a little bit dad-centric. because my daughter was playing, and so at the very end, it's going to zoom in on her. I didn't think I was going to show this in church. I was just taking it as a dad, but the music is really good, and so I wanted to share it with you so that you could see how good it is. So please forgive like the dad zoom in, but you will be able to see everyone who's playing for part of it. Check this video out of them playing music and leading each other in worship.
It's a real thing. It's a real thing. It's the air I breathe. Your love's got a hold on me, and it's holding me. It is everything. It's a real thing.
Yeah. And I should say, one of the things I've been really impressed by is Meredith Sikora, who's a senior in high school, has really joined Austin in taking leadership of that. And it's just really neat seeing a girl who's months away from going to college, like dig into these final months as a teen and be a leader. She is really, really just an incredible gift to Crossroads and a very, very gifted teenager. Number 11 has been our relaunch of Project Hope. And we are trying in Project Hope to partner with multiple organizations. In the past, this has been pretty centrally focused on adoption and fostering and all that kind of stuff. And that still remains there. They led Orphan Sunday just a few months ago. But they're also trying to partner with other sorts of organizations in the area as well. So it becomes multifaceted. This month, you'll hear from men in our church who are working in a mentoring program in inner city Baltimore, who meet with teenagers or preteens in a middle school to build a long-term mentoring relationship with them. And they are going to invite you to join them in doing this, because there is a chronic problem in some of the inner city schools of fatherlessness. And they've told me stories about how meaningful it's been to them to invite young boys from outside of their family into their family, to do family things with them, and to help them and to lead them. And they're like, it's not always linear. Like, there's definitely bumps in the road and ups and downs working with them. But one of them said the best thing for them is now someone that they started with about 8 years ago is a father now. And he's like, it's not perfect, let me tell you. He said, but they are working hard to be present in their child's life, and that was not how they were raised. Their father was not there for them. And he said, for me, that's a huge win over 8 years to see someone not get caught in the cycle of just disappearing, but instead of leaning in and being present as a father in their child's life. And so now that the kids they mentored are adults, they're ready to start over again with middle schoolers. And they thought, when they're ready to start over again, let's see if there are any other guys who want to do this with us. And so in 2 weeks, they're going to tell the story about what they're gearing up to do to get started in mentoring some young men's life who are at risk in an at-risk school in Baltimore. And that's a way in which we're trying to partner with something in the organization, use the good that's happening here and partner with something good that's happening there and see if we can make a tangible difference in people's lives. We also, in Project Hope this year, have partnered with the International Rescue Committee, which was actually founded by Albert Einstein. And it was founded in 1933 to help change people's lives who are fleeing from war and destruction in the world. And so we furnished an entire apartment for someone who has left a war-torn area of the world and been taken into the United States as a refugee. And so we've partnered with this organization to help people get started when they've left incredible atrocities and been allowed to enter the Baltimore area, help them get started well so that they can begin to recover from the terrible things that they have seen and have happened to their home and getting started here. Number 12 is this. We started mentioning you a couple months ago that we thought that we were maybe seeing the end of our mortgage payment. And this took a lot of focus and a lot of imagination. Coming into this year, we were about $400,000 short of paying off our mortgage. And that's incredible because when I started in April of 2018, we had just made a payment to bring us down to about $1 million of debt for this building. And so coming into this year, we had been for a while been under the practice of double paying our mortgage payment. We owed X dollars, we would pay X times 2 every single month. And Pastor Norm Huffman really led that charge for years along with the finance committee when he was the executive pastor here. They would have months where it was really tight, and they would send the payment in to satisfy what they owed, and then they would hope they could scrape enough off the bottom, and then they'd send in a second payment sometime during the month. That happened multiple times. Sometimes we were doing okay that we just sent both right at the beginning of the month. But we were trying really hard to get in front and get that mortgage payment erased. A couple months ago, I told you that we were really starting to see the end and hoping that maybe there'd be people who would partner with us to get to the point that we could be to the end. And people responded. There were people in our church who wrote $10,000 and $20,000 checks from savings or inheritances they got, hoping to help get us over the edge to pay off our mortgage. And I want to let you know that as of 2 weeks ago, shortly before Christmas, we made our last payment on the mortgage, and we are now debt-free. And so I do want to thank a few people. There have been leaders in our congregation who have helped. Like I said, Norm Huffman led for a while. Bob Evans was the chair of our finance committee until he resigned at the end of this year. He sent me an email saying, "I've sat in meetings long enough." Bob's been retired for a few years, and he says, I'm just done with sitting in long meetings, and I really respect that. He's been a huge part of us imagining and doing this. Our current finance committee members are Sandy Berger and Dave Shepard, and they've worked with Jake on the last bit of this. Jake has taken over from Norma as executive pastor and has kept that snowball rolling of us moving towards paying it all off. Doreen Armstrong has been our treasurer through it all. She's been an incredible help as well, making sure that our finances are in order. And then there are some who have been on the finance committee that are worth mentioning. 3, in fact, who are part of this vision to say, we've got to get this done so that the next generation doesn't have this debt. 3 of them have passed on: Larry Orwig, Mike Foley, and Ron Nolt, all absolute gifts of God to this church. And then there are others who aren't on the finance committee now, still part of the church. Brian Eisentrout, Amy Brown, Dennis Lawson, Victor Broccolino, Kay Wilder, all absolute gifts who have met and looked over the finances. And there have been times where it was scary. There have been times wondering how we were going to do it. There had been a goal set by my predecessor to pay it off by 2020. And then he resigned and moved on. And that was like the scary moment. Like, can we do this now? Like, are we, what are we going to do? This was his thing. Are a bunch of people going to leave? What's the church going to look like? And that was an incredible moment where Crossroads came together and fought through that season. And so even with all of that transition, we were only 1 year past it. By the end of 2021, we have paid off the mortgage. And now as a church, we are entirely 100% debt-free. And so I hope that you can see that God has been so faithful and helpful through this year. We've done incredible things with the help of God and ministered to so many people in so many different ways. And I want you to know, and I want to say this as clear and as strong as we can, that the reason Crossroads is special is because of people like you. I mean, it's special because God's presence and all that kind of stuff, that's obvious. But God has raised up an incredible people here. And I want you to know that when I speak of you, I tell people all the time about how amazed I am by the people that I get to go to church with. I love the people in this church. I'm amazed by the people in this church. And I want you to know that I fully believe that Crossroads is a special place, not because of any kind of pastoral leadership that it's had. I mean, pastors can ruin a church, but I'm not really sure that pastors can make a church great. It's people who make a church great, and you are some of the most special people I've ever known in my entire life. I am amazed by you. I am thankful for you. And all of the things that we do as a church are because of amazing people with incredible gifts who give selflessly, who work hard in order to make incredible things happen. The things that are opening back in our church are because of people who are taking the risk to say, I'm going to start volunteering again. I'm going to show up again. I'm going to be present. I'm going to be a part. And I thank God for all of you. The things that are not opening, the things that are still lagging behind a little bit, are almost solely at this point down to the fact that we're still hoping and praying for volunteers to return and to fill the areas that were once filled. For example, I hope you know this, but I want to verbalize it to those of you who come at 11 o'clock. 9 o'clock, this building is filled. I mean, it looks like it did in 2019. Before COVID, we roughly had 300 to 350 people at 9 a.m. and roughly 250 plus at 11 a.m. Now, 11 a.m., we have not been able to open our children's ministry yet because we don't have enough volunteers to get to that point. We're still kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel to make sure that 9 a.m. happens from week to week with volunteers. But we can't get 11 o'clock, this service, going back to where it was until we have enough volunteers ready to go that we can start children's ministry at 11 o'clock. And so on a typical week, we'll have between 60 and 100 in this service and 250 to 350 in our building at 9 a.m. because that's when children's ministry has started. But there are still families who want to come at 11 o'clock who can't come yet because we don't have people to staff children's ministries. And so I just want to say to you that as the year gets going, as we begin to imagine what this sermon may look like next year, all the things that we can accomplish, the momentum, this is about Crossroads saying, I'm ready to get going again. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves. I'm ready to make this a priority. We're leaving this season of debt behind, and we are moving into a season of mission, and that is exciting. But having no debt does not get mission done, right? Having space in the budget to do mission is helpful, but it takes people showing up with vision and enthusiasm and help, and maybe even saying, I don't know if I'm equipped for this, but I'm going to do it. That's what takes a church to get going again. And so I say to you that as we hope to lead into this season of mission, it's not going to be enough for us to declare from the rooftops, hey, we're debt-free, come to our church. That's not exciting to most people. It's exciting to insiders, and we celebrate that. But now that we've moved past the season of debt, the season of mission is going to take the people of the church saying, I'm in. I'm going to help. How can I roll up my sleeves? How can I be involved? How can I help us get going again? And so my hope and my prayer is that you'll prayerfully consider, as we continue to move into the season of mission, which ways you can latch on and join and maybe even pioneer what is happening, what can happen, what could happen through Crossroads. Because it is you that makes this church great. You are the reason this church is so amazing. And I thank God for each and every one of you. You are truly a gift, and you just utterly amaze me in so many incredible ways. And I want to see you use all of those incredible God-given skills for the sake of the kingdom and to see lives changed. And so if you would, prayerfully consider how it is as we start restarting things and giving opportunities, how you can latch on and be a part in propelling Crossroads forward into maybe even the best days it's ever had, God willing. As we close out today, I invite you, if you would you join me in standing as we sing in celebration and praise to our God who has been so good to us in the last year and who we anticipate will help us through this next coming year as well.